Thank you very much for coming back to panel 2, and we will discuss, of course we will continue to discuss Antarctic governance, but more internal mechanisms operationalizing the governance, and the keywords would be consensus building and transparency mechanisms. So we have, unfortunately, eventually we couldn't have the fourth panelist, so we have 3 panelists today, and I think as the chair, I have to intervene a little bit to broaden the issues that we are going to discuss, so I will be both the chair and the panelist, but we will do this in the order of Anaïs, Rémont, and me talking about the transparency mechanism, and going to Professor Nengye Liu, and finally Professor Kees Bastmeijer. So first, can I ask Mr. Anaïs Rémont, a PhD candidate at the University of Wollongong from Australia, and she will talk on the exchange of scientific information under Article 3 as one of the transparency mechanisms. Anaïs.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I will talk about transparency, and I will touch also a little bit on exchange of information. So I will start with transparency, and even if it's an old notion, it gained a greater consideration over the last 2 decades, and is now an imperative in international policy-making developments. At its basic level, transparency can be defined as, I quote, the degree to which information is available to outsiders that enables them to have informed voice in decisions and/or to assess the decision made by insiders. And it's a definition proposed by 2 American researchers, one on political reform called Anne Florini, and the other one is from, and the other researcher is Joseph Stiglitz, an economist, a renowned economist. So a turning point was set up in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration in 1992, and it embodied 3 fundamental rights. So the first one is access to information in order to empower citizens and encourage them to participate in decision and policy-making processes in an informed manner. The second one is access to public participation, to increasingly being a vital part of addressing environmental problems. And the third one is access to justice in order to provide the foundation of the access rights. And it facilitates the public's ability to enforce their right to participate, to be informed, and to hold regulators and polluters accountable for environmental harm. So these 3 fundamental rights represents the key pillars of sound environmental governance, and it's very important in order to promote transparent, inclusive, and accountable environmental governance. So when you talk about transparency, you need to make a balance sometimes between the degree. So in other words, the balance between transparency and the right to know versus privacy and the national security. So consequently, there is different types of transparency that can be identified. So the transparency in how the decision is taken during high-level meetings, the transparency in the exchange of data and knowledge, or transparency in the accessibility to information. So one concrete application of this concept that remains to be better enforced relates to Article 3.1, as Akiho mentioned, and its various aspects. A quick reminder of what is Article 3.1. It covers the following, and I quote, in order to promote international cooperation in scientific investigation in Antarctica, as provided for in Article 2 of the present treaty, the contracting party agrees that, to the greatest extent feasible and practicable, information regarding plans for scientific programs in Antarctica shall be exchanged to permit maximum economy and efficiency of operation. So this is the first little subheadings. The second one is scientific personnel shall be exchanged in Antarctica between expeditions and stations. And the third one is scientific observation and result from Antarctica shall be exchanged and made freely available. So I know that Akiho will touch base on the electronic information exchange system, so I will leave that to him. But there is and in my point of view, these 3 pillars embodies a way to ensure transparency. But there is another way to enforce transparency that consequently implies capacities. And it was envisioned like this, and it's still envisioned like this in the system, and it's the system of inspection that is in place today. So this system of inspection is proposed under Article 7.5, and it opens the possibility to designate observers with complete and unrestricted access to carry out any inspection, including aerial observation at any time over any area of Antarctica. This possibility can be either seen as a way to ensure transparency between nations, but also as a way to reinforce the freedom of movement by surface and air, as well as to prevent any secret military development, a freedom that was particularly defended by the US during the negotiations of the treaty. However, the validity of this inspection can be questioned, and I have in mind the recent cross-inspection between France and Australia on the Kees station and the Wilkes station. So I don't want to, how can I say, frustrate my Austrian colleagues, and I'm very grateful to be funded by them. But the point is that France concluded to the compliance of these sites, of the Kees and the Wilkes station, even if there was an advanced state of deterioration on the site, which constitute a significant risk for the Antarctic environment and its dependent and associated ecosystems. So to complete this inspection, there is a slow evolution of the ATCM, and it started in 1977 with a reflection on the public availability of the ATCM document after a meeting. So it is one way to also complete the inspection system. So this reflection led to the development of a documents database, gathering most of the documents discussed during ATCM, but access to some documents still requires filling out request forms, and others can be password protected, which can raise the question of public availability of documents, but with some limitation. Therefore, the question remains open concerning the transparency of action, because this is not a point that was finally mentioned, during the decision-making process, and I think that Kees will touch base about that aspects later on. So I will leave that to him, and on that note, I thank you for your attention, and over to you, Akiho.
Thank you, Anaïs. As Yoncho has mentioned in the first panel, having the early career scholars in these seminars have been very important elements of our thinking, and so we are very glad to have both Marco and Anaïs for this seminar. Thank you. So in order to further discuss or bring out some of the issues relating to transparency, I'm sorry, as a chair, I will give my thoughts on this issue. I think there are 3 aspects of transparency strengthening the Antarctic international governance. The first aspect of transparency relates to the transparency of the Antarctic activities themselves. The second aspect of transparency relates to the openness and accountability of the Antarctic decision-making process, and there is an important proposal during this Milan meeting, WP Working Paper 16, jointly submitted by the Netherlands, Australia, and the Republic of Korea, on enhancing transparency in ATCM and CEP, proposing enhanced media access to the meetings of ATCM and CEP, more proactive public outreach on what is going on in the meetings, and increasing the number of international organizations as experts participating in the meeting. This is the second aspect. The third aspect of the transparency is promoting effective Antarctic governance relates to the Antarctic policies of major Antarctic actors, by publishing official documents such as Antarctic strategies and policies by the consultative parties. This aspect of transparency today needs to be extended to non-state actors such as Antarctic tourism industries. But let me focus my comments on the first aspect of the transparency of the Antarctic activities, including the activities of non-state actors and the use of Antarctic facilities and technologies for potential dual use. So this issue has already come up in the first panel. The transparency of the Antarctic activities under the Antarctic Treaty through the information exchange and inspection schemes was originally obligated under Articles 3 and 7, Article 3, Anaïs has mentioned, of the Antarctic Treaty, first for efficiency of international cooperation in scientific activities, and second for compliance monitoring purposes. Through the Madrid Protocol, the Environmental Impact Assessment Scheme, the EIA scheme, has become an additional tool of transparency of Antarctic activities. Recently, this aspect of transparency has gained prominence in the ATCM discussion as a new challenge for effective Antarctic governance. Almost all of them relate to the concerns or allegations of dual use of or multiple purposes behind Antarctic scientific and logistic activities. The examples include bioprospecting in the Antarctic, Antarctic logistic facilities being used both by national scientific programs and commercial tourism, and the potential glacial geoengineering and its field testing in the future in the Antarctic. And on the last subject matter, there are two dedicated papers at the Milan meeting, one from SCAR in the working paper 51 and from ASOC, information paper 126. These examples relate to two or more potential uses and or purposes currently allowed under the Antarctic Treaty System, one use or purpose being the freedom, the science, and the other use or purpose being discussed under ATCM for possible regulation. Then we have more serious cases, which actually the panel one touched upon, of concerns and allegations which relate to another alleged use or purpose being prohibited under the current Antarctic Treaty System. For example, the geological surveys are being criticized by some as mineral resource prospecting, and Antarctic satellite data receiving facilities being criticized by some as being used for military purposes. In my view, based on the fundamental good faith of all the parties of the Antarctic governance, these concerns and allegations can be dissipated by reaffirming, strengthening, and perhaps reorienting the transparency mechanisms already built into the Antarctic Treaty System, such as the Electric Information Exchange System, EIES. The reorientation is called for as to the objective and the structure of the EIES, so as to evolve this scheme into a truly effective confidence-building mechanism amongst the treaty parties. In this regard, the working paper 15, submitted by Spain and Argentina on the comprehensive review of the EIES, is an excellent opportunity to reorient the EIES as a robust confidence-building mechanism for Antarctic governance. Just to give you an example from a Japanese case, how the EIES can be reoriented into a confidence-building mechanism with the cooperation and agreement of the consultative parties. If you go to the EIES section on operational information, and then you have a national expedition, there is a subsection on aircrafts and ships. Then you can retrieve military aircrafts and ships being used in Antarctica, which is allowed under Article 1, Paragraph 2 of the Antarctic Treaty. But the parties using military personnel and equipment in the Antarctic are obliged under Article 7, Paragraph 5C to give notice in advance. So this is the pre-season information, which is also entered into the EIES. Japan annually sent icebreaker Shirase along with 2 helicopters with 180 crew members from Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. Japan does notify the vessel and helicopters every year under the military or non-military categories. More important, for the EIES being reoriented towards a confidence-building measure would be the specific activities in Antarctica of the vessel, helicopters, and 180 crew members from the self-defense force. There are no secrecy about the Japanese self-defense force personnel assisting the logistic work at the Showa station, which is duly and openly reported in Japanese language. Because of the recent sensitivities of the use of military personnel and equipment in the Antarctic, Japan can show a better example of proactively using the EIS as a confidence-building measure by providing more detailed information and can actively engage in the discussion on the comprehensive review of the EIS initiated by Spain and Argentina in this direction at the meeting in Milan and hopefully in Hiroshima next year. So thank you very much. So this is all from me. And so we will go to a consensus building part of our discussions, and Professor Nengye Liu from Singapore Management University will focus on the intersessional consultations in order to reach the consensus. Thank you, Nengye.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Shibata, and also thank you, President Shin, for you two and the local team to organize this wonderful seminar and for having me here. I'm supposed to talk about consensus building. But before that, I would like to share with you a personal story. You know, for some of you who have known me long enough, that what I did in recent years is I started paying a lot of attention to my own personal well-being. So I have done some personal transformation, and so far so good. So far so good. I have managed to lose quite a bit of weight through sports, diet change, and also taking care of my mental well-being. So why am I mentioning that? So one thing I learned about how to take care of my mental well-being is to form a few habits, and one of them is to following the advice from my counselor is to write down what's good about today every night before I go to bed. So this is the book that I'm currently using. About I write down just a few sentences what's good about today, and why I bring it here and also taking notes is not something coincident. So it's something happened coincidentally. It's actually because our human brain is very strange. We tend to just genuinely like negative news. Think about the headline today, right? It's very negative, and more negative to come. But we forgot that, overall, if we focus on the positive side of the life actually is not that bad. So that is something I think. That is something that I feel like I should bring my What's Good About Today book to this seminar, because in today's environment, we can still have this beautiful group of people, a well-functioned Antarctic Treaty system that is still having this kind of a consensus building process in the beautiful Milan. That is very positive. I think that is the spirit that we need to carry on, for a treaty system that aims for peace, and we always forget that. It aims for peace and also environmental protection. So I think that's the personal story and overall kind of focus I want to talk about today when it comes to consensus building. So I started following Kamala negotiations in 2016, and over the years I also attended BBNJ IGCs during COVID time, IGC 4 and IGC 5.1. So when I was sitting in UN headquarters in the room while hearing delegations negotiating the BBNJ agreement, sometimes I just smile because I realized, so what happened in Kamala somehow was reflected in the BBNJ negotiation when it comes to especially when it comes to the area-based management tools negotiations. So countries learned their lessons from Kamala, and some delegations, they raised that, yeah, let's just forget about consensus building, let's do qualified majority voting because it doesn't work. I understand the frustration. I understand that consensus building is not necessarily the most effective decision-making process in international law. But I come here today with my point to be made here is like, I still feel like consensus building is something we should uphold in the Antarctic Treaty System. There are 3 reasons for that. First thing first, we shouldn't forget that international law overall is a consent-based system. You know, you need countries' consent to enter into a treaty, you know, to bring case to the international court and tribunals. You need countries' agreement to function, you know, the whole system. So I think that is the beautiful thing about the consensus decision-making process in the Antarctic Treaty System, and that is, you know, it doesn't just protect major powers. It protects all countries. So theoretically, anyone can veto. That if I don't agree, then there is no consensus. So if I openly say I don't agree with this issue, then actually nobody can force me to take that on board. I think that's the first thing first. And second is, you know, I think consensus is very important, especially in today's geopolitically tense world, that to bring countries together. And think about it. So these days, if we don't bring major powers on board for global issues, you name it. I don't need to mention specific global issues, but any global issue, and if we don't bring major powers on board through this consensus-based decision-making process, then even if we get an agreement, then the enforcement will be not very ideal or not very effective. So that's why, for example, UNCLOS, it was adopted in 1982, but most developed countries blocked it, you know, and until 1996, they finally, through the revised Annex 14 that revised, no, not through the revised Part 14 on the common heritage of mankind, most developed countries finally agreed and become on board, and then UNCLOS becomes the truly constitution for the world's oceans. And finally, I think the consensus building, consensus-based decision-making process is kind of like a safety net to prevent treaty systems from collapsing. Because for major powers, they know that when they don't like an idea, when they don't like an issue, they have an option within the treaty system, that is, they can block. I mean, this makes it, of course, the decision-making system very ineffective, not, you know, not efficient, not ideal, especially when we are facing urgent climate change crisis and so on. But I think for the treaty system, because that option does exist, then countries, especially major powers, they don't need to leave the system to do something by themselves, because that is actually a worst case scenario. So the thing is, we still bring everyone together in the room. We have lots of discussions, debates, quarrels, hates, and everything, but still, everything happens within the room, and we try to bring everyone on board. And the worst case is, major powers, they leave the room. They do their own. And if that is the case, especially in today's world, I think it's going to be actually bad news for a treaty system that actually, as long as the treaty system is there, it can still uphold peace and science and environmental protection of the Antarctic continent and its adjacent waters. So, okay, after mentioning all these 3 reasons, then should we just leave it? Like, you know, Kamala MPAs, we haven't had any MPA after Rossi MPA for so many years. Should we just leave it? I don't think so. I think there are still a few ways that we can really improve this consensus-based decision-making system, decision-making process. And we have already seen, for example, the BBNJ agreement is taking this on board. You know, And actually, PBNJ agreement is not that different from the UNCLOS decision-making system. So if you think about, and I read the history, the official negotiation record of the UNCLOS negotiation. So when the countries get together to negotiate the UNCLOS, what they do is they try their best to achieve consensus. They try their best, and indeed, they manage to get most issues based on consensus. But when they can't get the consensus, they do have the rules of procedure that 2/3 qualified majority voting would apply. So BBNJ agreement somehow also followed that path, but the threshold was even higher. So it's three-fourths of the party to decide that consensus cannot work, and then another round of 2/3 of the majority voting to agree on a topic issue. So I mean that is not ideal, but I think this is somehow a kind of like a way that we can somehow improve the consensus-based decision-making process in the international law decision-making. And also another way to improve this whole process is consultation. I feel like the pre-session, intersessional consultation is becoming even more important today because today we are living in a very geopolitically tensed world. So there are gradually camps of countries. So when you have geopolitical tension, when you have camps, what does that mean? That means the two camps, they don't trust each other, right? So they don't talk to each other. When they talk, they find a neutral place and then they send delegations. In daily life, they don't just pick up a phone call. So the thing is, if these days, if one country, they are really eager to protect the environment, they're gonna bring a proposal on ASPA, MPA, you name it, on board, and just directly send it to the ATCM. This might be seen by some camps as a possible surprise. So that is emotional, and that actually may create unnecessary barriers to make things happen. So that's why if you see the BBNJ agreement, now in BBNJ agreement Article 21, they actually have one article about consultation. So it's not just proposal. Proposal is not enough. In between or before submitting proposal, I think those proposing countries, these days, perhaps they need to do more work. That is to really conduct comprehensive enough consultation, informal, formal. I think that's not matter that much, but that kind of work now is more necessary than ever. I think that is something I would like to offer here based on what I have observed today until today. So I hope that could be a bit of useful for the discussion today. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nengye. Then we have Professor Kees Bastmeijer, Professor of Law at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And he will actually, in a way, integrate our comments into his thinking on the entire system of effective Antarctic governance. Thank you, Kees.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the hosts to organize this, and not only this year, but also multiple years. And I think this is very important because this is one of the ways to connect academic thinking with politics, and so I very much appreciate the efforts made. Just to quickly respond to the previous speaker, I very much enjoyed it, and I think from an international law and international relations perspective, I also fully agree. So I think these were very strong arguments. Sometimes as a lawyer, it brings me also to the question, who is making the law and for whom is it meant? And then I also be very, very aware that our law systems are extremely anthropocentric. It's about states and states' interest, and even property law is about, does the tree has to go because neighbor A has most of the strongest position in law, or is it neighbor B? But the tree has no standing, as of course Christopher Stone already wrote more than 50 years ago. And I think that that is one of the things that I find very important. The arguments were extremely strong, and I think I agree with them. But it is still very anthropocentric. So and sometimes I raise the question: who is paying the price for actually this system? And very often that's nature, or the beings. And I think that is one of the reasons why there is also some criticism or increasing criticism on the system because of lack of decision making. So we will see at some point rights of Antarctica being more promoted and also discussed. There is a special issue on that in the Polar Journal, if you are interested in that, from the second issue of last year, just to actually inspire to think about that nature of our legal systems. But it relates directly also to the topics of today, transparency and decision making. I think these two topics are interrelated, because if you do not have decision making, I think transparency is extra important to explain why. And that is extra when you have explained that the system is has an existence in the benefit of all humankind, as is noted in the preambles of the treaty and the protocol. So if that is the case, and then you have to explain how the system works, and sometimes might not work. And in that light, I would like to shed some light on factors that make decision-making difficult. And that is not based on interviews or empirical research, but mainly on my own practice in the Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings. And I would like to mention 10 of them. I hope I still remember them. But it starts with national interest. National interest can actually influence the positions of countries in meetings and also the willingness to accept consensus. A second would be culture. I agree fully with Stephen Chow that diversity, cultural diversity, is enriching, not only for science but also for governance, in the sense that you have a very rich debate on how things can be done, and you can learn from other parts of the world, but also other views and other human nature relationships, for instance. It may also be complexing. It may also be if a Dutch people or a Dutch person like me speaks about wilderness, it is about an area without humans, because we have destroyed almost all our nature, and we want to actually have a place where no people are. That's a completely different perspective from indigenous people, and particularly also from people that are countries that have a lot of nature left. So it's I think very important to consider that as well. So that is a second issue, cultural differences. It may also not only be sometimes natural interest or a problem of having a decision, but simply having problems at home in implementation systems. So we have seen the difficulty of adopting measures, for instance, the measure 5/2022 on permanent facilities. That has been a decision, a resolution, and that one of the reasons for that was that a measure would be very difficult to achieve, particularly also because of implementation issues and the chance that that would not get effective because of the lack of ratifications. And we know that other measures like the ones in 2004 and 2009 are still not effective, Annex 6 in 2005 as well, etc. So that might also be a reason. While there is political will to actually get progress and to have decision making, it might simply be a factor. We have discussed about it in the past, Akiho, and I think, yeah, we sometimes say that is actually a problem that should be solved with at a national level, and it should not be actually limiting progress at an international system, but we know that sometimes that does. A fourth factor might be geopolitics that comes into the Antarctic, and we have seen that in the last couple of years very clearly, particularly in relation to decision making on application for consultative status, of course. So that is about the positions of countries, four factors that I directly see. And most of these factors are not just relevant for the last few years, but for the last 30 years or longer. To connect with the talk, the very good presentation of Stephen Chow, science is a very important basis for decision making and not the only one. That is one of the things that was made, and science is also not always having the full answer. There is always some gaps in knowledge or things that we still don't know. And what I see, particularly this is more relevant in more recent years, is that while decision making on the basis of best available science has been the basis of the system for a very long time, and I think from the beginning, we see that it is sometimes shifted or pushed towards full evidence-based decision making, where and that is very relevant because that gives another role of gaps in knowledge in the decision making system, where in a science-based decision-making based on the best available science, and sometimes you only have expert judgment, gaps in knowledge may be a reason to take precautionary action. While if you very much focus on evidence-based decision-making in a pure sense of having evidence, then you would use gaps in knowledge to postpone decision-making. And we see that happening on certain issues at least. And I think I'm now at number 6. If we know that gaps in knowledge play a different role, it is extra concerning maybe that these gaps in knowledge may increase. So it's just to reflect also on a personal experience. I get more senior. My children would say old. And that means that I learn more and more. So my knowledge increases, but what is not a nice feeling, or maybe it is that I am also more and more aware of what I don't know. And that's much more than I know. And I think maybe that's in science as well. The further we get, we know more, but we are also more aware of gaps. But we also, for instance, know that climate change, as well as cumulative impacts, are very complex processes which increase our awareness of these gaps in knowledge. So if that is combined with that previous factor of a shift towards evidence-based decision-making and using gaps in knowledge to postpone decision-making, that is a concern. So number 7 would then be that the SEP is not able to really compensate that process. In fact, I think the SEP is also experiencing these factors to a certain extent as well. So compensating the shift to evidence-based decision-making and the increase of awareness of gaps in knowledge is not really easy, and it's very problematic. And I think actually the SEP is also experiencing some of these factors itself. Then the last 3 factors that I would like to mention relates to people around the table. In decision making, and that is, one is that we are in the Antarctic Treaty Consultative meetings at senior level, not at a very high level, not at political level. That may have advantages, particularly in certain time perspectives. We can also have a look at the Arctic some years ago. So it's not always a good thing, I think, to plea for high-level representation of countries, but sometimes it may help, depending on the topic and depending on the time frame. Then I think that the changing of delegations might also be sometimes disrupting. So people change jobs every 4 years in many countries, in foreign ministries. It's more difficult, although the skills of these people are immense, to get contacts and they may actually also know each other from other systems, which may also be very helpful. It's not always helpful in a system. And then the last, number 10 factor, and there are probably more, is intersessional work, as mentioned, as a very important instrument in decision making. My experience is that generally there is some reluctancy to do intersessional work or to be involved in intersessional work because it requires capacity, and that's not always easy. So I think transparency, and I think that the talk by Akiho Shibata is helping us also to understand that transparency can actually be relevant at different levels. It can be also between the states involved in the system and create trust. I think you gave a very convincing example of that. But it's also in the relationship, for instance, between the system and the international community. And in that, I think that transparency might actually be a very important topic. Also to explain that complexity of decision making, not necessarily to actually invite criticism, maybe actually to lower criticism, to explain people how difficult it is, and then actually take your approach of looking at the positive sides. Given all these factors, it is fantastic that quite some discussions are made and that we have reached consensus on quite some very crucial issues in the past. So my final comment would be, what would an increase of transparency do? Would it add a sort of 11th factor to the difficulty of decision making? That might be, because it might be that states are less open and transparent on their position. It might also be that there is more space for lobbying, for instance. But it might also be that you have more understanding of how the system works, that more knowledge holders get around the table if stakeholders are invited, or that there is more pressure on really ensuring that, not only that nature is not paying the price for not making decisions. So I think I don't have the answer to that, but I think it is an important topic for the ATCM to discuss, and that is the reason why the Netherlands has tabled working paper 16 to discuss the increase of transparency in the system. And I hope we will have that discussion at the ATCM. Thank you very much.
Very much, and of course, if any of the panelists would have any additional comments in relation to whatever that you have heard from the other panelists, I think I would welcome that. Of course, Kees has probably did it already. All right, from both of you. If not, I can actually go right to the audience to flag any additional comments or questions that you may have. Many of us are within the system. Of course, I am not representing any government, but maybe we can have some information regarding why the decision making are so difficult in the ATCM. Okay. Anything to add, Nengye, Anaïs, or from the floor? Okay, maybe Nengye, your comparison with the BBNJ processes where it provides for intersessional consultation also. And you also said about formal or informal. Now, as you know, in the ATCM context, all the intersessional consultations are almost all informal. So intersessional contact groups, they are in a way that it's not mandatory. It's a voluntary participation. And sometimes some of the parties who should have some concerns with regard to a certain agenda items actually do not participate in the intersessional consultations and come to the meeting and they raise the objections at the meeting, and within 10 days it's very difficult to solve those difficulties during the meeting. So intersessional consultation process in the ATCM context, maybe because it's informal and it's not mandatory, it's not maybe not working as well as we think it should be. Do you have any solution to that?
I'm thinking something slightly different. So I'm thinking of Kees' comment that every government has a very busy agenda. So and also capacity is an issue. So of course, we have ATCM for a reason, that we have annual gathering, we have a meeting for 2 weeks, and then all the governments send delegations, and then they come here to discuss. I think that is what it should be. But what I'm thinking about this consultation, or more consultation, especially if, in case, 1 or 2 delegations or a few delegations, they are planning to submit a proposal. So in the case, for example, in the BBNJ case, or in the Kamala or ATCM case, area-based management. proposal. I think the thing is, these days, if that is just being brought on the table during the official meeting, that might not be enough to guarantee its success. So I think that's why we have seen working papers, like Professor Shibata, you sent to us all those working papers. They have submitted, like Spain made one on regarding the international activities. I'm thinking of this in a broader sense. It's not just those online forums. I'm thinking about, for example, just give you one example. I don't know whether it's still working now, probably not. But I think in the past, Australia, China, they have the Antarctic Dialogue. So what they do is like, a group of Antarctic people. They, for example, one year they go to China. They have hot pot, together, have a bit of a chat, exchange ideas, and then next year I think the Chinese diplomats and Antarctic people, they go to Australia. So, but I think that stops. That has stopped. But my point is that is actually also, I would consider that as a intersessional consultation. It's a broad sense. It's like to brief countries. Basically, it's just to make friends and convince others, right? So you try to make friends and convince others before you put a official proposal on the table, because then otherwise these days it won't work. That's kind of like my sense of doing that. So how to do that, that's a different question. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's very important that we also include bilateral consultations or dialogues if a certain agenda item is a concern between certain numbers of countries. I think you have a very good point. Okay, any other comments or questions from the floor? If not, actually, is there anything? Because we would like to have like a general discussions, including both the first one and the second one. So okay, Stephen has one. Okay, thank you. Could you give mic, because we have to record the talks. Thank you.
I'll just stand here and ask the question. And you may not have the answer, but I'd be really curious to know your thoughts on this. Is decision-making really slower than elsewhere in the Antarctic Treaty System? I look at other international agreements and like sometimes they're busy for 20 years. So that would be my question. Thank you.
Example or any views from maybe starting from Kees? Yeah.
Yes, a very good question. I find it difficult to compare it with other systems. And I have been working for an environmental ministry for 10 years, and that was in the United Nations framework, and that is a long time ago. And we had a lot of meetings without any success. So it is, and I think that others can base on more recent experience in other systems. What I would hope is that in a system with only 29 consultative parties, it would not be the same. And that with such a very strong bond and also friendship here and there, and with such a rich history, that we would keep actually that pace of making decisions as we have seen in the past, with not only the treaty but also the Seals Convention and CAMLR and the protocol, of course, but also in between with a lot of recommendations and later measures, etc. So it's and then I see that compared to the first 30 years, the previous 30 years are less productive in terms of decision making. So I think that your question is very fair. Just to get a better understanding of how the system functions in a global perspective, that would be very helpful to now and then highlight. I have looked at it mainly from the perspective of the system itself, but that's also showing the value of that question, I think.
Thank you, Steve. It's a very good question. I really like it. I think I can it reminds me of one organization, which is International Maritime Organization. I think because I did a PhD on prevention of marine pollution from shipping, so in the past decade. So that's why it brings back to me the memory that what they are very proud of is they have this tacit acceptance procedure that because the shipping standards, they are very technical. So what they do is like, okay, they have this 2 years time-bound update of those technical standards and rules that attach to the different annex of the International Convention on the Prevention of Pollution from Shipping. And then if nobody openly disagree, then that will just automatically become effective. I think that's what they used to be very proud of. But I have also heard that even IMO, and if you think about IMO is dealing with a industry, shipping, that is inherently international. So it is supposed to be international. But even that, they are also facing a great pressure from the geopolitics. But then that brings back to Antarctica. If we think about Antarctica, it is also inherently international, if I may say so. I'm not representing any government, but I think that is why we are here, right? From different nations. I know claimants have a different view, but it is international. So, well, is ATS slower? I guess my thoughts are also once again a bit different. It depends on what kind of issue. So, if we do have a urgent issue that we must deal with, for example, the krill fishing, the krill biomass is going to collapse in 5 years' time, and then we don't respond, I think that really is kind of like going to be an example that, wow, ATS is so slow. But it seems that we don't really have that kind of urgency. So that if we don't really have that kind of urgency, then there is no good benchmark to say that, wow, the decision making of the ATS is very slow or not. But it's definitely not slower than many organizations. But whether it is slow, I think we need to have certain benchmark to really answer that question. So I don't really have a full answer.
Okay, so Anaïs?
I would say that to complete probably the Kees point of view, I'm also from the international lens. So if we look at the climate regime, when the parties met in 2009, they failed to agree on something more binding than the UNFCCC. And it takes them 6 years to agree to the Paris Agreement. Similarly, under the Convention on Biological Diversity, we saw that since the convention was adopted, there are some non-binding tools or non-binding frameworks that were agreed time to time. So I would say that even from the international point of view, not only the system point of view, to agree on something and to make the decision-making process more stronger or more binding takes time, even in other systems. To just reflect on what just Nengye said, effectively we don't have a benchmark because there is no sense of urgency in a way, even if I disagree because I attended to the last Kamala and there is basically a sense of urgency regarding krill fisheries. And even with this sense of fisheries, it's this sense of urgency, countries failed to agree on something that is more protected, because the balance between marine protected area or krill fishery, all of that gather so many interests for so many states that it can be very difficult to agree on something. So, and I think it's the same in every area of international law. It's not only attached to the Antarctic Treaty System. I spent 2 weeks in Nice for the UN Ocean Conference. BBNJ is one of the great examples of taking time to agree on something. Now that BBNJ will be soon in force, what will be the next step? What will be the next step to make sure that all of these engagement, all of these, can be implemented effectively, not only like on paper, because, and from my French point of view, this is sometimes a criticism, a strong criticism on marine protected area. For example, we claim that we have a space that is protected, but on the field, when you go on sea, a lot of activists are saying that this is only marine protected area of paper, not really implemented. So there is a point about how can we make the international law better implemented. I don't have the answer, but what I would say to answer your question is that it's a dynamics that can be seen in many other areas and not only the Antarctic Treaty System.
Good, thank you. And of course, I do have my responses, but I will save that during the ATCM, and of course, we can talk bilaterally. So thank you very much. So this will conclude the panel 2, and Dr. Shin will maybe close this one, maybe looking towards the future. Thank you.
Right. Combining this panel 1 and 2, okay. What can you? Don't have much time, huh? Yeah. Okay. Well, then I may just try to wrap up in my own way. Then maybe I'm somehow touched by what my friend Nengye Liu said. Strengthening consultation, especially well before. I agree. Nonetheless, maybe it could be a little naive to, if we think of just the timing of submitting a proposal and undertaking a consultation before that, it may be, we may need a little more than that. And what I have noticed in the recent years, sometimes you go to a state of almost deadlock and standstill. I think maybe we need 3 things. Kind of rule setting or practice making. And it's not just we make our decision by 3/4 or by consensus or something. But when we have different views, how are we going to approach this and try to come up with some solution? And let's say if we can somehow come up with framework that people with camps with different views cannot go on for too long, but have to make a compromise so that there is some tight mechanism. So one cannot win for all. And secondly, trust building is still very important. It's not just rule-based order, but also it has to be trust-based order. And then thirdly, if we can somehow develop continuing success stories, small success stories, then this is going to help us to move forward. Yeah, and I think the whole intent of this kind of seminar is to provide ourselves with food for thought, and I think we have done a good job this year again. Okay, all right.
Okay, so we'll...
Maybe you can close.
Okay. Well, thank you again very much for your participation, and I think we intend to continue this seminar, the Antarctic Governance oriented seminars during Hiroshima and also in Korea, hopefully into the future, and I would very much like to have your participation again in those seminars. Thank you very much.